right, how's everybody doing? So, if it's all right with y'all, I'm gonna just geek out on y'all for the next 25 or 30 minutes or so about what I get up to. And I invite you all to look for the ways that you can find parallels in how you apply creativity to whatever it is that you do in your work. I come from a smattering of different backgrounds that I've combined together, and people ask me what it is that I do. I don't rattle off this list of different disciplines, but instead I just tell people that I design the future, which, yes, yeah, you are correct to laugh. It does sound like the worst LinkedIn bullshit that you've ever heard. But I'm gonna try to give you some context as to why I describe things this way. I got my start, a circle diagram, by the way, working in the world of fiction. I worked with a studio in New York called Perception, where we found our way into this unusual niche of designing fictional technologies that you would see in science fiction films, and particularly tons of different Marvel movies. So anytime that you would see characters who are interacting with futuristic computers or holograms or interfaces or heads-up displays, we were conceptualizing and designing and ultimately implementing those into the films as a visual effect of sorts. The very first one that we had worked on was creating tech for Tony Stark in the Iron Man films. And this was really fascinating to me because when you think of product design or user experience, you have to become obsessed with the needs of your end user. And we would think about, all right, well, what are all the things that Tony Stark, as the end user of this technology, requires? But we would also have to remind ourselves that the actual end user wasn't just Tony Stark, but it was also the person sitting in the last row of the movie theater consuming this story and taking it in and trying to make the most sense of this world that they can. And so in playing around with these priorities, it also was really interesting to me to find that pretty quickly once we started doing this work, real-world technology brands started showing up on our doorstep and effectively saying something along the lines of, can you help us bridge the gap between our current products and experiences that we're creating and these more aspirational visions of what we see from technology in fiction? And this was really stimulating to me. I thought it was really fascinating to look at the area where there is an overlap between these two worlds. And there's always been a sort of precedent, even going back to like Jules Verne, for science fiction to inform science fact. But I also thought it was a great opportunity to put an extra amount of respect in what the differences are between creating make-believe, pretend technology for the purpose of entertainment or moving a story forward, and figuring out what from that can translate into creating products that you're hoping are going to enhance somebody's life in some way, shape, or form. And so for me, the relationship between these two things went in both directions. And it was really fun after working with real-world product teams to start then going back to film and creating concepts and designs that would be just a little bit more informed by real-world technology. And in film, I was finding that some of the other spaces I was working in were getting a little more cinematic as well. I found myself directing title sequences and even designing things like the Marvel Studios logo that would appear at the beginning of every one of their films. And from there, I looked for ways that I could continue to bring that heightened cinematic feeling into real-world products, things like the Hummer EV, where my team and I designed all of the instrumentation in this vehicle. And I love having this as part of my catalog because it is a ridiculously cinematic vehicle. Like, for better or worse, this is the Michael Bay of cars, right? Like, this thing is so over the top and so insane and wild. And so there's something appropriate about it having these hints of science fiction qualities sprinkled throughout the experience when you're sitting in and operating a vehicle like this. But it's also unbelievably important when you're working on a product like a vehicle to be immensely respectful of all of the human factors that play a role in this. I mean, if there is a chance that whatever you are designing for an in-car experience could in any way confuse or distract your end user, the worst case scenario is the worst case scenario you could possibly imagine. So you have to make sure that you're balancing these two sort of mindsets or approaches when you're creating for something like this. And for me, that just has been something that keeps echoing in my mind, the connection between these two worlds, the overlap. And a few years back, it started dawning on me that this loop is moving faster and faster, and it feels like reality is catching up to science fiction. In some ways, reality is fully surpassing science fiction. And so with that in mind, I decided it was time to start my own practice, BlackBox Infinite, where we focus on working with some of the best innovation leaders across various brands who are all grappling with the same challenges that many of us are in figuring out all of these new technologies that feel like they're just like falling out of the sky left and right right now. What can we do to make the most of them? How can we implement them into our products, into our experiences, and also not get caught up in the sort of impulse just to start slapping on the tech of the month to try and appease stakeholders or get a little extra attention. So we've been doing all sorts of different things at BlackBox, from reimagining the way that we would interact with the digital displays in our cars. In a car, as I was mentioning before, safety is so paramount. So we're looking at ways that we can have touch screens that you can manipulate easily while your kids are screaming in the back seat and your hands are full, and you might even need to interact with something using your knuckle as opposed to your fingertip, right? Like, how can we create these affordances that enhance these experiences in new and unexpected ways? We've been spending a ton of time working with the intersection of artificial intelligence and sports. There's so many amazing things that are happening with cameras and sensors that are allowing all these new ways for us to understand different pieces of culture and entertainment. We get into even some bizarre or unusual things. We've, for the last 2 years, been working with this company called Figure AI, who are one of the leaders in this humanoid robotics space race that's unfolding at the moment. And we've been helping them to design the face for their humanoid robot, which is such a bizarre challenge. And I mean, there's so many unusual and strange human factors that you have to account for, thinking about what this means for all kinds of implications around safety. But you also have to figure out culturally, like, how do we put a robot in the workplace and have it not be terrifying, right? Like, how do we create something where it's comfortable or reasonable to be alongside something like this in your space? So ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what I mean when I describe what I do as designing the future. So what do we really know about the future? If you were to go out onto the street and ask any random person, what is the future going to be like? I think we can all imagine or expect that some of the first things that will come to mind would be images or visions from science fiction. When I was a kid, I was deeply inspired by science fiction, and I saw all of these incredible visions of what the future would be like. In 2001, A Space Odyssey, it's super prophetic. Like, Stanley Kubrick nailed the concept of FaceTiming with your child at home while on a business trip, right? Like, this is what I am going to be doing 90 minutes from now, spot on, 100%. Nailed that in science fiction. Motorola engineers were deeply inspired by the Star Trek communicator when they were designing the first ever flip phone. We even in Star Wars would see visions of advanced prosthetics that could improve our lives in really powerful ways. But when I think about the future that, say, my kids are exposed to today, that a younger generation see, well, they have no shortage of science fiction material and visions of the future, but the future seems ubiquitously oppressive and bleak and gritty, populated with robots that look like they have substance abuse problems. And even when I think about my own very specific lane of the future of technology, I see all kinds of different beautiful designs of holographic interfaces and various holographic topographic maps and charts of the solar systems and arrays of Spider-Man suits. And I think to myself, all right, well, this shows me what the future of technology is going to be like. Future of technology is going to be a bunch of glowing blue shit, right? And so I think it's important that we all remember that, science fiction is still fiction, and the future is not an aesthetic. The future is not a vibe. The future is not set dressing. The future certainly is not a font, right? And don't get me started on the fact that across the United States, half of the small towns in this country, the police cars have the most cinematic aggressive typeface along the side of the car saying, "Police, the movie," right? It's important that we remind ourselves that we have all of the control and all of the autonomy to design the kind of positive future that we want to share with each other, that we want to live in ourselves. So years back, before I had started BlackBox, I had an opportunity to work on one of the rare instances where Hollywood shared with everybody the image of a positive future. And so many years back, my team and I got a call from the team at Marvel Studios, and they said, we're just finishing the script for this movie called Black Panther. And Black Panther is going to take place in the fictional world of Wakanda. And Wakanda must have the most advanced technology that has ever been seen in a movie before. And my heart starts racing. That's a dream brief for me. The brief was really pretty much just that simple. The only other element that was part of their brief was that in Wakanda, the culture revolves around a magical element called vibranium. We said, oh, cool, what's vibranium? And they said, we don't know, help us figure it out. And so we jumped in and we started exploring ideas and thoughts that were entirely grounded in real-world principles of science and engineering. And we started with things like, well, vibranium, it sounds like the word vibration. Vibration equals sound. There's this phenomenon known as cymatics, where you use sound frequencies to create geometric shapes and patterns. It's beautiful, it's complex, but it also feels organic and surprisingly natural. We discovered that the University of Tokyo was using ultrasonic sound waves to levitate styrofoam particles in the air. These ultrasonic transducers we were actually using for one of our automotive clients to generate a mid-air haptics, where you feel a sensation of touch in the air just by holding your hand over what's effectively an ultrasonic speaker. But to see it moving particles and matter in air and to be able to control those things, absolutely magical to me. And so we quickly got to this point where we said to the team at Marvel, after sharing with them these different things that were getting us really excited from the real world, we said, all right, well, for the film Black Panther, we think the key technology paradigm can be vibranium sand. It can be a physical matter that is controlled by ultrasonic sound waves. And so one of the first things that we did was we built a sand table in our office just so we could start playing around and reminding ourselves what it felt like to interact with sand. It's not a touch screen that you tap. With sand, you brush it, you comb your fingers through it in very specific and particular ways. We even played with installing a digital display into our sand table to see how light would interact with the translucent qualities of sand. And ultimately, this all led to us creating a whole suite of different technologies that appeared throughout the film Black Panther. And so this is just a montage of the different ways that vibranium sand found its way into the film. And it was really exciting for us because the director, Ryan Coogler, would call us up every few weeks and say, oh, we should use vibranium sand for this tactical table. Or in this scene, we can use it as a communications tool between the characters, or even as a presentation tool of sorts. There's even a scene where there's a car chase where a vehicle is remotely piloted from thousands of miles away, but there's still this strong connection to the action because the vibranium sand brings this physical element into this otherwise digital experience. The vibranium sand even became the building blocks for the way that Black Panther's superhero suit would activate and build on during the most exciting scenes in the film. The first thing that happens in the film Black Panther is that there's a storytelling sequence, a sort of history sequence or animated prologue that tells you the history of Wakanda, and that was all animated as vibranium sand because that's what would be in a Wakandan museum. And then we closed out the film with this closing title sequence that plays almost like a celebratory music video at the end of the film. This was really exciting for us because Ryan Coogler had Kendrick Lamar make a song specifically for this title sequence, which that alone blew my mind. We took Kendrick's track, we used the bass line from it to drive the way that the sand would actually bounce and undulate because vibranium sound is controlled by ultrasonic sound waves, right? And so there's all of these geeky layers of guardrails and strategic engineering that's supporting this concept. And I have no illusions to the fact that nobody comes out of the movie theater after Black Panther and like elbows their friend and says like, did you notice that the vibranium sand was being levitated by ultrasonic sound waves, right? But I would like to think that the audience can tell that the characters know what's going on, that there's this deeper layer to what's supporting these concepts, and it feels a little more grounded, it feels a little more real and practical to them. So for me, this was a really powerful lesson that I learned in my career. Working on a Marvel movie, it's unbelievably difficult work. Your clients have the highest expectations imaginable. You push yourself and your team to the absolute limit to deliver for these teams. And working on Black Panther was by far the most ambitious contributions my team and I had made to one of these films, but it was the easiest. It went 10 times smoother than any of our previous collaborations. And I attribute that to the fact that these ideas, these concepts that were pretty wild, they're pretty imaginative, they're pretty out there, but they were all tied to real-world principles of physics and engineering, and they had this logic that was driving them. And that made, on a film, I might be fortunate to have stakeholders who are probably a little more imaginative than maybe in other verticals or spaces. But there's always still going to be some folks who aren't just, enamored with pure creativity. They really need to understand the why of all of this and what's driving all of this and what does this mean for me? What does this mean for the users? What does this mean for the audience? And so to have this underlying engineered logic, it made it so much more effortless for us to push the boundaries for what we thought a positive future could look like. So there's a few other things that I think about when I'm trying to create the right formula to design a positive future. I think it's incredibly important to always understand what the forces are in the present day. What are the things that are driving us forward that we can look at and extrapolate forward into the future? And it's easy to get caught up in a lot of things that maybe feel like they're trending in a negative direction or in a way that we don't want them to. But in reality, like year after year, life is increasingly improved than it was the year before across every different facet that we can think of. We have had, more empathy across the world than we've had before. We've got way less extreme poverty than there's ever been across the globe. There's more use of renewable energy than there's ever been. Like there's all of these improvements and things that we can start there and just continue to extrapolate those things forward rather than the sort of dystopian factors that may fill our social feeds and distract us. It's also important to think about a broader sense of community when you're designing a positive future. And for me, this is really important in fiction. I always ask people, well, what's happening in this world with the elderly? Where are the children in this story? Where are the pets even, right? Like there's these other things beyond the main characters that make up our world, and how can we make sure that we're accounting for everyone? And to that end, I think there's a lot of different factors, especially if you get deep into the world of user experience, where concepts of accessibility make some really drastic improvements, not just for maybe certain folks or populations that they're intended for, but ultimately we find that accessible design just improves the design for everyone across the board. I don't know if you all are familiar with the user experience concept of the curb cut theory, where there's a gradual transition going up onto a curb to improve wheelchair access. But that also means that baby strollers have an easier time getting up onto the curb, as do bicycles or rolling suitcases or people who have a difficult time making a higher step than others, right? And so there's all of these different ways that we can be looking at these different factors. And I suspect that in this audience, you all are used to the notion of doing your planning, doing your designing, doing your imagining in a way that starts from these very meaningful places, right? And having this sort of pragmatic mindset front and center. But I would also extend to you all to look for ways to capture some form of cinematic magic in the experiences that you're thinking about. For me, being able to find the perfect yin-yang balance between these things, whether I'm working with a film director or I'm working with a head of product or a head of innovation at a major technology brand, having this balance dialed in is an absolute accelerant to any of the initiatives that I find myself working on. Because if you don't have something sound and pragmatic, the engineers will kill the initiative in the first month, right? But if it has that cinematic component, there will be a very high-level stakeholder who at one point will pop their head into the room and they'll see it and their eyes will light up. And they will just say, oh, whatever we have to do to make sure that we maintain that particular attribute of what we're building. Because it just changes things when you can capture your stakeholders' emotions in these scenarios. Circular diagram, by the way. So one last thing I want to talk about is, as we're seeing this way where technology is catching up with science fiction, at BlackBox, we've been absolutely enamored with the Apple Vision Pro headset. Now, this thing it's got some challenges. It's unbelievably expensive. It's pretty uncomfortable and hefty and whatnot, but it is still this magical hallucination machine that when you slide it onto your face, you can see almost anything you could possibly imagine. And so we were excited to see this coming to a broader market, but we were also a little disappointed that when you put on this $3,500 hallucination machine, you were mostly seeing like PDFs floating in space, right? And like, you could have as many email windows open as you want at the same time. And so we threw our hat into the ring to say, okay, we think there's something more exciting that could be created. And we put together an idea and a prototype for what it would be like to watch a Formula One race within a spatial computing atmosphere. And to me, this was really exciting. I thought it tapped into a lot of the impulses that we have towards the sort of Tony Stark qualities of the tech of the future. But at the same time, it also felt a little bit like this, right? It felt like this whimsy, this magic of playing with toys and manipulating little cars with your hands and being able to look out on a racetrack from this, God's eye view and investigate any different detail that you wanted. And it was also important to us that this concept, what you see right now, is something that was assembled just using visual effects techniques. This is very common for us to put together what we call a cinematic prototype, just to get the idea out there and to start to show what's possible here. Now, this wasn't just, hey, it would be cool if you could just see this happen, but this was built around a number of considerations, like the fact that with the sport of Formula One, you do, and have actually for generations had access to real-time telemetry data, the position of every single car moving around the racetrack. You've obviously got 3D geospatial data from 3D maps and whatnot. And when you start to merge these things together, you get something that can feel really compelling, really powerful. We put this together, we put it out on the internet, and it went supernova viral. It is, to me, astounding, the feedback and response that we received from this. We've got somewhere north of 70 million views across the different social platforms. If you know Marquez Brownlee, a really important technology tastemaker, he's featured it on his YouTube channel 2 or 3 times already. And to me, the most exciting thing that came out of this experience of creating this cinematic prototype and putting it out there into the world was that different teams of developers just started prototyping it and just started building it on their own just to see if they could. And this was really exciting to me to see these things coming to fruition, and to me almost started to feel like a new model for even conceiving and developing products and experiences. There was one particular version called Laps that was significantly more faithful to the original concept than any of the others. And so I've teamed up with the developers who put this together, and today there is a fully functioning beta for this experience that if you are a racing fan or a Formula One fan or even just a little curious about technology, it's really transcendent to put on a headset and to be able to see a slice of reality that's happening live somewhere else in the world and have it sitting on your table and to be able to control it and look into all of these different details and different elements that are a part of it. We've been really happy to see that even though this is technically a private beta, it's developed a little bit of a cult following. It's gotten some wonderful response and feedback. But for us, it also is this vision or a model for the way that we think about these new kinds of experiences. And we stumble almost accidentally into these details where just for fun, we put into when you watch the Las Vegas race, you see the Vegas sphere. And if you get close enough to the Vegas sphere, you can look into it and you can actually see the seating chart for the Vegas sphere. And people start asking us about, can we use this for ticket sales and for other kinds of retail experiences and whatnot. And we look at all these other opportunities where there's other platforms or paradigms that are prime for convergence here. My movie isn't playing, but if this movie was to play, you would see that when you look up at the ceiling, you see real-time National Weather Service radar data so that you can tell if a storm is approaching the racetrack. If you're an F1 super geek, you'll know it's a big deal when all of a sudden a race is going on and then rain hits. It completely turns everything inside out. And so why shouldn't it just be as natural as just looking up to understand what's happening and what is the context here? So to me, there's all of these endless opportunities with these technological paradigms. I do think it's challenging at times to get a little bit out of our own way to think of what are the natural or simple ways of taking advantage of these things. But I also think it's important that collectively we think about where we are today, right now. And this moment in time that we are all living in, I think, is a very interesting time. We have all together lived through some very disruptive shifts in technology and culture that have affected us all. And I think we're also, it's very easy to recognize that we're at the beginning of a whole other wave of disruption. And particularly in the space that I come from, the background that I started in, where everybody's doing all sorts of different creative things, everybody is in a state of panic. Like every time a new version of Sora is unveiled, everybody has an existential freak out because we can't imagine where things are headed. What is this going to do? How is this going to change and upend every part of our lives that we've been so used to? And I think it's really critical that we take a breath. And to be perfectly honest, even though I present myself as a futurist or as someone who can help guide everyone towards where the puck is headed, I don't really know what's going to happen in the future. I don't know what's going to happen in the near term. I don't know what's going to happen in the more distant term. There is one thing, though, that I'm very, very confident about regarding the future. I have no question in my mind that when we arrive at whatever future it is that we land into, we're going to look back on today and say, well, back then, back in 2025, that was the magical time. That was the Wild West. That was where everything was changing so rapidly that you could make any impact that you could possibly imagine. The clay was still soft. The cement had not yet set. And we had all of that control and we had all of that opportunity back in 2025. And I think also like today, like Monday today, here at an event with a bunch of our colleagues and friends and others that inspire us, others that go through the same challenges that we all face, it's the perfect place for us to all look at the ways that we can take advantage of all of the opportunities that are available to us to design a positive future. So thank you very much. If anybody wants to... If
John,
anybody wants to...
up for some questions?
Yeah, if anybody has questions or anything, happy to geek out. One of the first comments that I received on social media was like, imagine downloading this just to watch Ferrari fuck up their strategy in 4D. I was like, yep. So there's and it's interesting. I'm seeing this trend happening. I've lived through it with HoloLens, and I'm now seeing it also begin to happen with the Apple Vision Pro. These headsets, they're unwieldy. They're extremely socially unacceptable, right? But we're finding that for those reasons, those brands, they're pushing them more towards this very sort of industrial applications. And so I know there's been some really interesting things going on with Trimble, a major construction manufacturer with the HoloLens. I know Apple is right now behind the scenes working with a number of different brands on more sort of like industrial applications of this tech. I think that I'm very bullish on spatial computing, on augmented reality, but I do think we're currently in sort of augmented reality winter where we have to wait out the time that it'll take until these things are a little more compact, lightweight, and comfortable. And it's tough because that's physics that you have to work around. It's not just like the software has to be more clever, but you really have to work through a lot of challenges with like material science and whatnot. But I think when we get there, and it might be in 3 years or it might be in 12 years, it is going to be a game-changing paradigm, that we haven't seen since the smartphone. What's my background? So I studied graphic design, and I got my start in motion design, effectively animated graphic design. And the very first kinds of projects that I was doing was like animating sports scores flying onto the screen in an interesting or exciting way. But when I stumbled into this space of, well, yeah, these computers and these interfaces that appear in films, somebody has to design those things, that somebody has to create those things. That's where I just got really engaged and got really interested, not just in that, but also getting deeper into the world of building real products, which is like a completely different sort of mindset that you have to apply there.
Can, can I ask I really liked this challenge in all of our careers to think about making things not just pragmatic but cinematic. But for you, it probably comes naturally what counts as cinematic. But for us, can you generalize? Is it movement? Is it stuff that subverts your expectation? What makes something cinematic?
To me, the non-answer is just something that makes you go, wow, right? Is something that has some dramatic impact or surprise. And there's a million different ways of doing that. There's subverting expectations. There's withholding delight until just the right moment and then making sure that there's a key interaction or aspect of it that's especially satisfying or compelling. And in different spaces, it takes a different amount of sweetening to figure out what's cinematic. When I'm working with car companies, car companies have a very difficult time getting technology to work well in their vehicles. If anybody here is a car owner, there's a good chance that you hate the tech in your car. But sometimes even just making subtle or very obvious changes or improvements to these things can add a new level of quality or finish to the experience. But to me, ultimately, if you can get things to a point where it feels, yeah, there's more polish there, but actually the polish is making it work better at the same time. But maybe it's more polished because it's functioning better. And when you can get into that loop where you can't tell whether it's the pragmatic strategy or the cinematic execution that's getting you there, to me, that's innovation magic. And that's where projects or initiatives or features start to take off and move through even the most innovation adverse organizations.
We talked a lot today. I mean, the Formula One example is so fabulous. As you said, they've had all this telemetry data for years. One of the challenges that's come up in a lot of conversations here is the lack of just data for people in the built environment. I'm a big believer, as you are, with like augmented reality first, maybe not with the headset, but even in our phones. So I'm just curious, between Wakanda and where we are today, are there examples from, not where I'm sitting in my living room, maybe watching a race, but augmented reality for people moving through the built environment that feel real or feel closer, that could inspire people here to help get that data to make it possible in, between not now and 2050?
Yep. So to me, this is one of the biggest challenges with where we are at in augmented reality winter at the moment, is that all of the most potent and powerful applications of this tech they're not best used on your couch at home or at your desk in the office. It's best used out in the world or navigating through a building or an environment where you benefit from having extra insight dropped into a world that maybe you're not fully familiar with. Currently in the workplace, I actually think there is one thing that's, I think, really powerful that's totally available in the moment. With an Apple Vision Pro headset, you can use it to bring up a virtual monitor for your laptop. And to me, I find that whether I'm in someone else's office or I'm at home, or earlier today, I was working on slides in my hotel room, sitting in the weird comfy chair that nobody ever sits in the hotel room. I'm sitting there, and I've got my laptop on my lap, but I have like a 150-inch screen floating in the middle of the room in front of me that's giving me this much better experience that I can get out of my little like 16-inch display. And so I think things like that, I imagine, will bring opportunity for a whole new level of fluidity to our workspaces and where we choose to set ourselves up for work. And it's interesting for me, like using the Formula One experience, for me, when it's race day, I like to sit on the couch in the room where I normally have my TV and whatnot. On practice day, I sit at a table and I'm doing work on my laptop, but I have a tiny little miniature racetrack that's just to the left of my laptop that I'm keeping tabs on. And on qualifying day, I sit in a comfy chair in my living room that has no screens in it, but it's just the comfy chair. And I have this huge map sitting in the middle of the floor, and I'm sipping my coffee because Formula One's always in the morning when it's taking place in Europe. And my dog is like walking across the track like Godzilla, you know, stepping on cars. And so I think I love the idea that we're trending away from, we all sit in the same place and look at the same surface, and instead that surface of interest can be anywhere, and especially when we're in groups, it can be a campfire that we surround and have this much more natural or intimate way that we're able to connect with each other a little bit better, rather than all sitting in the dark in a movie theater side by side, not seeing each other's expressions while we're having this shared experience.
What has you the most hopeful about building the future that we all want to live in? Easy.
Yes, so I think we're on a pathway towards having ultimately so many of these things, and you know, the piece that is the most powerful conduit of the moment is AI, right? And that's going to have a really big impact on everything. And you know, when I talk to folks who get a little bit worried about their particular industry that might be about to be upended by AI, I just tell them, like, well, don't worry, it's coming for every other industry at the same time. And that's going to, we will all collectively have no choice but to adapt to that and to make the best of it. And I am an optimist, and I do believe that, yes, there's some dark pathways that we could go down, but I don't think that we're collectively, globally willing to all, you know, blindly go down that route. I think it's going to introduce new levels of freedom, new levels of expression and opportunity to make the future of our lives a lot more comfortable than it even is today.
All right, well, this was awesome. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.